Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He said, "In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the current swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to the worthless idols turn away from God's love for them, but I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you very much, Tim. We're going to be continuing Jonah. For those of us who were here last week, we'll have heard the start of the story. But one big thing we acknowledged last week, the book of Jonah, it's not really about Jonah, and it's not about him being swallowed by a fish. It's about God. It's about what God is like and what his people should be like. And so last week, the big thing that we considered was that God is sovereign. He's in control. He's in control of nature, of people, of even chance and who's saved. And so because God's like that, his people should want to go his way rather than our own. But we've seen that Jonah has been going his own way. So last week we heard how God commanded Jonah to go to the city of Nineveh and preach to them, a wicked city, to call them to turn from their ways. But instead of doing that, instead of going east over the desert to Nineveh, he went west over the sea towards Tarshish. He very much went my way rather than God's way. And that brings us to where we are in chapter 2. Jonah's been heading that way. There's been a storm. He's been chucked overboard and swallowed by a fish. Chapter 2 is Jonah's prayer from the belly of the fish. Now, he's been there 3 days. He's had time to reflect on what's happened, and this is his reflection. And the big thing that he's saying is he's recalling how the Lord saved him from the grave. And that's what we're going to see too. We're going to see how it's the Lord who is the one who saves people from the grave. So looking at Jonah's situation, we see how he was utterly beyond the help of other people. You know, the sailors had tried to row back to shore, and they couldn't. Now he's been chucked overboard in the middle of the ocean. They've not got a single hope of being able to help him. He's utterly beyond their help. He's utterly beyond saving himself. You know, if the boat couldn't make it to shore, he surely can't swim to shore, and he's sinking. Those words in verse 2 and 3 describe it. From the deep, in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the current swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. Jonah is sinking down to the He calls it the realm of the dead. It's poetic language, but it describes his situation. He's as good as dead, and he sinks down. In a kid's storybook version of this, you might see a fish with a mouth open, waiting to swallow Jonah as he's chucked off the boat. But that's not how it happens. Verse 5 and 6 tell his experience. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. The very earth itself barring him in. Seaweed wrapped about him like the cords of death as he sunk to the roots of the mountains. He is drowning. He's drowning in the depths of the ocean. Has anyone here ever feared that they were in a situation they might drown? Yeah? A couple? I don't think I've ever quite got to that point of thinking, I'm really going to drown. But last year I went whitewater rafting for a friend's stag do, and the raft flipped at one point. We were expecting it, but still, I was under the raft. I couldn't get my head up. The water was pushing me. I couldn't do anything about it. I was helpless. I had to wait for the water to push me out. And there was that brief moment where if nothing changes, I could drown. And it's terrifying. This imagery that Jonah uses, it captures something of that terror, right? He's sunk down, drowning, the earth barring him in, seaweed wrapped about his head. To the roots of the mountains he is gone. He is utterly beyond saving himself. Helpless. He's utterly beyond the help of others, utterly beyond saving himself, and he's utterly undeserving of any help from God. We've seen how Jonah's behaved. He has consistently gone my way rather than God's way. It's consistent disobedience. And it's not ignorance, it's willful disobedience. He knows that God himself has spoken to him, and yet he's like, no, I'm going my way. Utterly beyond the help of others, utterly beyond saving himself, utterly undeserving of any help from God, and yet, verse 6 goes on, but you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. At his most desperate moment, he turns to the Lord, he prays, and the Lord listens to him and saves him from where nobody else could, though he didn't deserve it. The Lord sent a fish, rescued him. He was in its belly for 3 days, and then he's vomited up on the shore. Our God saves people from the grave. And that doesn't just stop with Jonah. That's not just something then. The place we see it most clearly is Jesus. Jonah was in the belly of the fish. He was down in the realm of the dead 3 days. And then he was brought back to life. Jesus spoke about himself saying he would give people the sign of Jonah. Jonah was metaphorically in the realm of the dead for 3 days. Jesus was stone cold dead in a tomb for 3 days and then raised back to life. Our God saves people from the grave. And he proved it with his son. But it doesn't even stop with Jesus. Actually, it continues even today. We don't see graves splitting open and hands coming out the earth, but spiritually we see people coming to life. You see, you and I, everyone about us, we're all physically alive. I learnt an acronym, Mrs. NERG, at school. I don't know if any of you guys did something similar. They're living creatures, they move and they respire, they sense. Something to do with nutrients. I can't remember the rest, but all living creatures, we do that. We live and we breathe. And that's true of all of us, everyone about us. And yet, spiritually, when we're left to our own devices, we're just like Jonah. Let me read you some words from Ephesians chapter 2. It says this, as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. And because of that, we were by nature deserving of wrath. On our own, our spiritual state is that we are dead. All people, everywhere, by ourselves, just like Jonah, utterly beyond the help of others, utterly beyond saving ourselves, and utterly undeserving of God saving us. In fact, we're in an even worse position than Jonah. Jonah, as he was drowning, he still had breath in his lungs to cry out to God. But we, by ourselves, are dead. Spiritually dead and deserving of God's judgment. A dead person can't cry out. They can't see, speak, taste, touch, anything. And that's what we're like spiritually. But God is the same God who raised Jonah from the dead, who raised his son from the dead, and who still raises people from the dead today. If you trust in Jesus, if that is where you are today, then you have been raised from the dead. You have been raised from the dead. Ephesians goes on, verse 4. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. We don't earn this. Corpses can't earn anything. It's purely out of God's love for us that he does this. We don't deserve it. It's his kindness towards us, which is the best news because it means no one is too far gone for God. Nobody's messed up too many times. Nobody's so far that God can't save them. You can have messed up 1,000 times. You can have messed up 1,000 times just yesterday, and God can still save you. Let me tell you a story about a guy called Shane. Now, it's a true story. Shane was one of the most dangerous prisoners in Britain. He'd been sent to prison for attempted murder. He'd stabbed a guy in the head. And whilst he was in prison, he incited a riot. And in the midst of that riot, he smashed a coffee jug and stabbed a prison guard 3 times. Now, the prison guard lived. But after that, Shane was sent into solitary confinement. He was fed through a hatch. He had no human contact. He was fed through a hatch. When he had exercise, he was allowed to walk alone in a caged yard. When there did have to be interaction with the guards were in full riot gear, body armor, shields, helmets. He was somebody who'd made 1,000 wrong decisions. And yet, whilst he was in prison, he heard about Jesus. And he began to believe. He trusted him, and God raised him to new life in Jesus. Shane is now out of prison. He's telling people about how God has given him new life. That's what he spends his time doing now. It's hard to imagine somebody further away from God than Shane. And yet God rescued him from his spiritual death. God brings spiritually dead people, like Shane, like you and me, to life, to be his children. Our God saves people from the grave. And the second thing that Jonah points out to us is that idols are completely worthless in comparison to him. Look at verse 8, what Jonah says. This is, he's summarizing here. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. Now, to illustrate this point, my lovely wife has volunteered to come and be a corpse. And so, Rosie, do you want to come up? Now, I promised her... is this on? Red? Have we got anything there? No? That's not coming through, is it? Let me get a different mic. This is blue. Okay, could you turn up blue channel, please? click the little button at the top of it so there's a light on, and hopefully we'll get something coming through in a moment. Ooh, mysterious. Anything? Is there anything coming through? No. Oh, well. Okay, I'll just use this microphone. Sorry, Rosie, you're going to be sort of behind me. So, Rosie is our corpse. This is our spiritual state before God. And what do people do when they realize that they're in this sort of situation? Well, they quite often pursue other things in life. They do what Jonah says here is clinging to idols. Now, have any of you here heard of Brian Johnson? No, okay. He is a multimillionaire who is obsessed with wanting to live forever. He has spent over the last three years, he spent $4 million on this quest. And so his daily routine includes downing 111 pills. He wears a baseball cap which shoots red light into his scalp. He collects his own stool samples to analyze them. He sleeps with a laser mask on. He's doing all these things to try and live forever. And so here we go. Let's give our corpse some medicine, okay? What difference has it made to the corpse? Nothing. Brian is, he's still going to die. He's still going to face God. He can try something now, but it's puny. Other people go for a different tactic. They chase sort of happiness here and now. So, some of them go for holidays, fancy holidays, fly off to the Bahamas. Others go for a bit of money. They want all that can afford, all the lovely food, the nice house, the good car. Others go for sex and drink and drugs. They go to live their big life now. Others go for something a bit more wholesome. They go for family. Here's a picture of my family. They try and, have as beautiful and lovely a life as they can now. But actually, what difference has any of this made to our corpse here? None. It's made no difference at all. Others go for something different. They seek comfort in other religions. They pursue the teachings of Buddha or Muhammad. But ultimately, those are fruitless. They don't change anything either. Others go for distraction. I think this is what a lot of my friends do. They get a blindfold, and they cover their eye. They know there's something sort of true about Christianity, but they choose to ignore it. They just live their life. They just block out that little voice that says, yes, there is something more to this life. There is a God out there who calls me to follow him. And I think as they block it out, they instead live for comfort. They try to make their life as comfortable as possible. So here we go. Here we go. Right, what difference has that made to our corpse? Well, okay, we've got a comfy corpse. This is what idols can do for you. They can give you a sort of comfortable life. They can give you a bit of money. They can give you some stuff like that. But ultimately, it's still dead. But God can do something different. God can raise you back to life. Thank you, Rosie. Come on up. There we go. That's done. Let's give her a little hand. Yeah. God raises people back to life, which is something that no idol can do. Jonah sums it up in verse 8 and 9. He says, those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I vowed I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. Salvation comes from the Lord. Not from the Lord and money. Not from the Lord and family. Not from the Lord and Muhammad. Not from the Lord and anything else. The Lord alone is the one who brings dead people to life. He's the one who raises people from the grave. So that brings us to the question that we're going to ask each week as we're going through Jonah. If God is like this, how should his people respond? How should we respond? And the first thing I want to say is that we should respond by turning to him to be saved. Jonah realized his need. He was drowning, facing death. He called out for help, and he received mercy. And we can do exactly the same. We realize our need as a corpse facing judgment. We can call out to God for help and receive his mercy. Now, perhaps you're here today and you're still sort of weighing up Christianity. You're thinking things over. Great, I'm really glad you're here. What I want to beg you to do is put your trust in Jesus. Turn to the Lord, cry out for help, because he can and will raise you to life. And it's simple. It's as simple as saying a prayer to him that says, Lord, I'm sorry for my sin. Thank you so much for your mercy. Please forgive me. You know, that's the starting point of the Christian life. If that's something you've not yet done, please consider it. Please turn to the Lord. If you want to chat more about that, grab me after the service. I am so happy to chat about it. Or chat to somebody else at church who you know is a Christian. It's the best thing you could ever do. But perhaps for you have made that step. You have turned to the Lord. Well, the second way that Jonah calls God's people to respond is by turning from idols. So we've seen idols are worthless compared to God. And yet, we're still tempted by them, right? We still chase after them sometimes to the detriment of our relationship with God. We let a good thing like money or family or something like that become something that takes God's place. A good thing become a God thing. That's an idol. And so I want to give you a chance now to consider for yourself, is there something in my life that has taken God's spot at number one? It could be career or academic success. It could be pursuing a relationship or family or comfort. Here's some little diagnostic questions which can be helpful. How do you spend your time? How do you spend your money? What are you most afraid to lose? What do you turn to when you're in trouble? What is it that keeps me from closeness with God? I'm going to give us a minute in quiet to just think that over. I'll say those questions again, and then we'll have just a minute in quiet to reflect for yourself. Is there an idol in your heart which you need to say, that's worthless compared to God? I want the real thing. I'll read these questions again. How do you spend your time? How do you spend your money? What are you most afraid to lose? What do you turn to when you're in trouble? What is it that's keeping you from closeness with God? Let's take a minute.